Simon was upset because of not being able to celebrate Halloween with the rest of his friends. He had planned on sneaking out to go trick-or-treating with them, but he decided not to because if his dad caught him, he would be furious. Simon's dad, Jack, was the local sheriff, and he banned Simon from celebrating Halloween because last Halloween his wife Elizabeth burned in a fire in the local town hall. There was a Halloween party going on there at the time. Simon's dad was giving him his usual speech. You are not going to go trick-or-treating, you're not going to be watching scary movies, and you are not going to be reading any scary stories. Do you understand? Halloween is banned from this house. Now I am going to have to go out on patrol, and unfortunately the local idiots make this the busiest night of the year, so don't give Sammy any trouble while she is babysitting you. Simon agreed, and Jack went outside to his car to start what would be a busy night ahead. Sammy looked at Simon and said, "Geez, I thought my dad was strict." Simon said, "You have no idea how strict he is." Sammy felt sorry for Simon not being able to celebrate Halloween and go trick-or-treating with his friends. So she said, "Look, if you want you can watch a horror movie that I'm watching at 9. At least you can get into the Halloween spirit by watching a scary movie." Simon said, "No thanks," and he walked up to his room. He opened a notebook and started writing a scary story. Jack was driving along the road when he pulled on the brakes. He couldn't believe his eyes. He nearly ran over some idiot in a Halloween outfit, but he knew something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it right away until it suddenly clicked. When it hit him, what person would be almost 10 foot tall wearing a Halloween outfit? Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jack backed right away and drove down the street, not sure of what he saw, but he knew that it was moving and was alive, but couldn't believe anything that size could be human. He then thought to himself, could it be some teenagers playing a trick on him, using a few of them up on a ladder inside some outfit? He changed his mind from that idea when he froze in shock seeing trick-or-treaters run screaming from what looked like giant zombies chasing them. The place was like out of some zombie movie. When it finally hit him, he drove straight home, and when he got into his house he said to Sammy, "Where is Simon? Where is he?" She said, "He is up in his room. Why? He didn't move from his room all night." A few seconds later, Jack entered his bedroom, and sure enough, Simon was writing. Jack shouted, "Stop writing!" Sammy was standing by the door now also, wondering what was happening. Jack explained, "Simon, your mom didn't die by accident in that fire. What I mean is, it wasn't just a random accident. Your mom had some curse. I'm not sure how she got it, but her mom before her had it also. For some reason, what they write as a story happens in real life. You needed a Halloween story for school, and your mom wrote one for you. She was drunk because I admit I was giving her a hard time, but she thought she was doing a great thing writing you that story. It was even after Halloween because she would have wrote it on Halloween, but she didn't have a clue she was so drunk. Anyway, she would not have dreamt of writing in that diary when she knew it was cursed and when she knew everything would happen in real life. But she was drunk. She hadn't a clue what she was doing. But I want you to know, Simon, this wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. But please do not ever write in that diary again. All I know is that that notebook is evil. She went there that night to save people. She saved everyone's life but her own. She burnt in that fire, telling everyone there would be a fire. She waited there until everyone was out. but only on Halloween night in a certain notebook. What did you write? Whatever you wrote will happen in real life. It's a curse, especially on Halloween. Suddenly Jack burst into flames. Simon and Sammy screamed. None of the room caught on fire, but his dad was lying burnt to a cinder on his bedroom floor. Simon wished he never ever wrote a Halloween story. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Michael was searching for a place to stay in New York as he was offered a new job in Brooklyn. He was feeling disheartened as the more places he searched, the more he felt he couldn't afford anywhere as there was no place that met his budget. But suddenly, when he was just about to give up, something caught his eye. He had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. There was an apartment in a building in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from where he was starting his job. He couldn't believe his luck, so he emailed the company right away, and a week later he moved in and was lying down on his bed smiling at the fact he had a place of his own in Brooklyn and was about to start a new job. He began to read a book and relax as he was starting work in a week. He was feeling tired and was about to go to sleep, so he laid the book down beside him on the bed. Then he suddenly got a start when something like a shadow moved on the wall in front of him. He looked around expecting to see someone that made the shadow, but no one was there. No one was in the room. The shadows began moving around the room. He couldn't make any sense of them. Michael found it very hard to go to sleep that night, but eventually he slipped into a deep sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. The next day he was walking down the street and past a street basketball court. He knew that the guys playing were looking at him strangely, so he asked, could he help them? One guy said to Michael, "You're that guy who moved into room 456 in the building right up the block, right?" Michael was surprised these strangers knew and replied, "Yes, how do you know that? And why do you ask?" The boy said, "Man, did you hear anything about that place? There's weird stuff happens there, that's all I'm saying." Michael was thinking about the boy's words, and instead of carrying on for his walk around the blocks like he usually did since he arrived in Brooklyn, he walked right back to his apartment. He opened his laptop and searched his address. He froze in horror when he saw a photo of a little boy and a man and woman on the screen. He guessed they were his parents. As he read on, he learned that the little boy was out playing one day when a Necronomicon book from H.P. Lovecraft was thrown out the window from stories above and hit the boy on the head. The boy suffered memory loss and trauma and was put into foster care, and his parents were found in the apartment with their bodies mutilated. There was no evidence of anyone in the apartment, and no conclusion as to what really happened to the boy's parents. Michael heard of H.P. Lovecraft before, and knew about his famous monster, Cthulhu. Then suddenly shivers ran up his spine as he thought of the shadows going up and down the wall many times since he arrived in the apartment. They reminded him of what Cthulhu looks like, that he saw down through the years. He remembered when he was a kid reading comics, and the character was in loads of the pages in different forms of horror. Then suddenly Michael heard a noise, and he screamed when he saw a weird-looking monster in front of him, which, even though he couldn't believe his eyes, knew that it had to be Cthulhu. He screamed as the monster rushed for him, and as he backed back more and more, Michael fell through the glass, out the window, and fell on the ground, and was killed instantly. As he was falling to his death, his memory came back. It was always Cthulhu who was making sure of Michael's fate. Michael got his job in Brooklyn and found the apartment and was drawn here by the spirit of Cthulhu, who hadn't finished him years ago. The curse only had power in the apartment. Just before he hit the ground, he had remembered he was that little boy in the photograph, so many years ago, that got knocked unconscious by the Necronomicon being thrown from his apartment. Now the job is done, and now Michael is gone. Tom was a very skilled hacker and could hack almost anything. He hacked various government organizations, and the thrill was huge, but he wanted to go on to the next level. He used to work his way around the dark web like he owned the place, but what really made him stand up and take notice is the internet rumor of there being a Marinas Web. The Marinas Web got its name from the Marina Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. There was meant to be all sorts of huge secrets revealed in that deepest part of the dark web. He knew the difference between the deep and dark web. The deep web was mostly medical records and police records, etc., and the dark web was where all the bad stuff goes on, like hiring serial killers and human experiments against a person's will, etc. But in the Marinas Web, he heard the world's most top secrets are revealed, like the Vatican archives and the secret location of Atlantis. As exciting as all that sounded to him, it was a bigger and deeper agenda he had than access those secrets. He just had to know if it was real. He heard the rumour and didn't take much notice of it until one night he was eavesdropping on his dad and heard him speaking about an artificial intelligence that no one can tap into because there is a certain algorithm needed and it is impossible to find without a quantum computer. The thing is, his dad works in the government and he knows there is a quantum computer in the building. He just needs to find a way in. Through intensive research how to hack the building's security system, he found a way in. And once he was near the quantum computer, he knew he had a very limited time. He was disappointed that nothing was happening, just the usual dark web, until the screen went black, then green, and an angry-looking emoji popped up with writing, "Marinas Web. AI system accessed." He smiled with excitement and wondered what would he try to find using the AI and the algorithm. The secret location of Atlantis, the Vatican secrets. It all seemed exciting now that he knew that he was in the AI system. His face dropped when he saw what was on the screen. It said, "World War III activated. Earth will be destroyed in 10 seconds. Then the countdown began. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. I am afraid of what's lurking in the dark, yet I am afraid to put on the light. I just feel like standing here, waiting to the natural light come in when the morning comes. I can feel the evil all around me. It sends shivers up my spine. I am tired of standing, so I will sit. I feel like sleeping, but I can't sleep. I feel tired, but at the same time, I feel wired. The light switch is there, right across the room from me. I could stand up and walk over any minute and leave this god-forsaken room, open the door and just leave, and never come back. But I don't want to. I went from sitting down on the ground to lying down. I fell in between sleep and waking. I didn't want to fall asleep, as if I fell asleep, then what was in the dark could have all its own way. I could smell a horrible smell. I could feel a presence. The morning came. I was lying down as long as I could without opening my eyes, but I knew I eventually had to, and sure enough, when I did, there were 4 of my friends lying in a pool of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I killed them all. I couldn't control myself. What will I do now? How can I live with this? Then I could hear something. I got a start. I looked out the window. There was a police car. I didn't expect to be caught so soon. Then I froze as the police came in and ignored me. Then I realized they weren't ignoring me. As I could see, there were more bodies on the ground than 4. That's because the 5th one was the dead body of myself that lay there on the ground with my friends. Then it dawned on me about taking the tablets last night to overdose. They had worked. I was dead. Then something told me to look out the window, and I saw 4 of my friends staring right at me. My name is Stephanie. I got kidnapped when I was 8 years old, and now I'm 18. But the thing is, I managed to escape my captors. They were basically my mom and dad for 10 years, but they treated me like I was dirt. Mom just got drunk and high every night, and my dad did the same when he wasn't beating up on my mom. I am lost and found personified. That day I walked up to my home, I felt a mixture of happiness that I was home and sadness about missing 10 years with my parents. When I first knocked on the door, I recognized my mom's face, but noticed there were 10 years of strain and worry on her face. I felt a pang of guilt knowing it was over me, but it wasn't my fault. I was just a kid, and kids go missing every day. It isn't their fault, of course. My mom asked me could she help me with anything, thinking I was a stranger. I said, "Mom, it's Stephanie." My mom gave a shocked look as soon as I said it, but a couple of minutes later we spoke in the living room for what felt like hours. I was tired, all I wanted to do was fall asleep. Then the next day, an FBI agent called to the house. He wanted to speak to me. I didn't want to speak to anyone. I just wanted to curl up in a ball and fall asleep for weeks. The FBI agent said to me, "Hi Stephanie, I just have a few questions. I want to ask you about who had you for 10 years. And why now? What made you leave now?" I felt angry at the question and said, because I couldn't other times. They had me locked up in a house. I didn't go to school. I didn't go out. I was inside all of them years thinking I'd never come out. When I came out, I felt like the sunlight was going to blind me, as I wasn't used to the sun. They kept me in a room with boards on it. I could watch TV. I read my dad's books. That's why I could read, because that's the only schooling I ever had in the 10 years. The FBI agent stopped me and asked, "Your dad?" I said, "That creep who kidnapped me. He asked me to call him Dad." The agent then said, "Was there a woman with your dad who kidnapped you? And had they any other kids of their own, or like in your case, had been kidnapped?" I said no, I just remember a man and a woman kidnapped me when I was 8 and told me to call them Mom and Dad. The agent said to me in a way I knew he was trying to make me feel like he was my friend. "Okay, Stephanie, I know this is very hard for you, and I know you must be so tired from all you went through, but could you please tell me about the day you were kidnapped? Try to include every detail, please." It was a Friday night. I know because the man who told me to call him Dad kept shouting about his high school football team winning. Before you ask me their name, I forget, but I just know that it was a Friday night. Friday night lights and all. I was coming home from my friend Lucy's house. It was about 5 p.m. and a man pulled up in a car and told me that my mom, my real mom, asked him to pick me up. I found it strange knowing I just lived 10 minutes down the road. I spent what seemed like hours telling the agent what happened and the description of the people that asked me to call their mom and dad. A week passed and I was settling into my old home. My parents were so happy to have me home. My mom told me that she spent years and years looking for me and put up missing posters all over town. I felt it strange after a few days that neither was asking for a DNA test. I was hoping they wouldn't, but I still felt surprised. It usually took just a few weeks, in some cases only a few days. I had to up and leave from pretending to be a family's long lost daughter, and then up and leaving before that damn DNA test ruined it. That day I left, there was no man that asked me to call me Dad. When I was 8, I just had enough of the teachers and social workers trying to tell me I was crazy for attacking the damn kids in school. They were so annoying anyway. They made me so angry I bit them. It was when I ran away and did what I did I could really express my emotions, but no one would accept them. It's not that I was able to stay around any family long enough for them to even notice my odd behaviour. I used to check out social media pages and missing children sites and get all the information I needed to pretend to some grieving parents I was their long lost daughter. If only they didn't bother with that damn DNA test, then I wouldn't have had to run away. I would have given them hope, and hope is good, right? There's nothing wrong with hope, but one night I was down in the woods, and there was this guy I was making out with. It was a perfect chance for me to indulge in my favourite pastime, so I bit him in his neck and tasted his blood. As I was sucking his blood, I could see the new man I chose to pretend was my dad standing in front of me. He wasn't shocked, he just stared right at me. I was wondering, what the hell is he not shocked at me biting into a guy's neck and sucking his blood? Then he said, "You should really hide your diary better. I read all about what you do to poor families pretending you're their daughter. But I have some good news for you. You think you're lying to us, but of all the odds you chose us. You did. And Stephanie, you thought you were lying to us, like all those other parents. But Stephanie, you're not lying. This time I am so happy to tell you, you are my daughter. You're home, Stephanie. I knew I didn't need a DNA test, because you see, I am like you. I am a vampire." "Memento mori," Stuart whispered the phrase to himself over and over as he picked both of his bags. The first was his gym bag, which he would be utilising this morning. The second was his medicine bag, which he would use later tonight. Once both bags were packed, he mixed his pre-workout blend to enhance his gym session, slung his gym bag over his shoulder, and walked out his bedroom. The brilliant sunshine hurt his eyes as he emerged from the poorly lit sanctuary he called his room. As he closed and locked his front door, the wind picked up and rustled the door. Squinting, he looked up at the sky. A bird of some sort circled his garden. He imagined it to be a bird of prey, looking for a meal to swoop down and capture. This thought made him smile. What a life such a bird must live, taking life as when it sees fit. The drive to the gym followed the same routine every day, with hardcore rock thumping from the speakers to rile him up. Once completed, more routine followed, with a shower and protein shake while getting dressed. The drive home would be the complete opposite of the previous trip, as Stuart would listen to softer soul music and take in the beautiful trees that lined the roads. Often he would even give $1 or $2 to a homeless person that would come tapping on his window for change. Humans are creatures of habit, and Stuart is no different. The only difference in the routine of the day would be the night festivities of this particular evening. Most nights he would cook dinner, eat in front of the television, and then proceed to watch more television in his bedroom. Tonight, however, was the 42nd Thursday of the year, an arbitrary fact to most, but not to Stuart. Tonight was his night to indulge, just as he let out the maniac in himself on the drive to gym. Tonight was the night he let the maniac out, loose on the world. People do not change much from youth to adulthood. Some maturity occurs, but the general character and behaviour of the individual remains. Stuart had always wanted to help the world, at least in a way that he saw fit. As a youth, this involved cleansing his neighbourhood of stray dogs and cats. He took no actual pleasure in the act, no more so than a postman would rejoice delivering mail. He simply felt it was something to be done. As he did it over the years, his method of euthanization had evolved from bludgeoning the animals to squeezing their necks until he heard the sick pop of confirmation that the neck had broken. But as all things in life evolve, so did his target for cleansing. Stuart had grown to realise that in order to cleanse the world, it was not dogs and cats that needed to be cleaned. It was the people. The people were the sickness. 41 Thursdays before the chosen night meant that he knew exactly what he was doing. He planned out his routines, as well as who his patients would be. Access to the sick was yet more proof that people cared not one bit about the sick. Throughout the course of his planning, he would walk into various hospitals. Talking to the nurses, he would gain the knowledge of whether they would still be in need of his services when the glorious night came. The ease and success of his planning was yet more proof given to him from God that this was indeed his mission in life. He worked from home as an architect, but Stuart had always wanted to be a doctor. He may not have the qualifications, but the work he did was equally as important. The only difference that Stuart saw between himself and traditional doctors were the clothes they wore. His choice of dress for the task at hand was a heavy overcoat paired with an authentic 1620s plague mask. After all, he couldn't risk getting the sicknesses. Once home from the gym, Stuart cooked and ate before taking a nap in preparation for the big night. He set an alarm for midnight, but the excitement for the evening woke him up 15 minutes before the scheduled time. He lay in his bed in the dark for a moment. He felt at peace in the dark. He looked around in the darkness at the outlines of the furniture in his room. His light breathing was the only sound around him. He flexed his toes and arched his back to stretch the sleep away. He sat up straight in the darkness. Stuart was ready to begin his night of work. Memento mori, he proclaimed to the darkness. The patrons of St. Barnabas ward, that for the mentally ill, were long asleep by the time the wind blew Stuart through the doors. He had his medicine bag in hand and the plague mask on as he sat beside his first patient. He never rushed the process. Each patient was as important and deserving as the next. Stuart picked up the patient chart and read the name out loud. James, I absolve you of your sins. May God have mercy on your soul. Memento mori. And with that, Stuart inserted the needle deep into the arm of sleeping James. The pancuronium bromide slowly left the syringe and set to work causing powerless and respiratory arrest. This method of cleansing was the best Stuart had found prior to this. He had held a pillow over the face of his patients. He moves from patient to patient with the obvious speed of a very experienced executioner. As he injects the saving liquid into his last patient, her eyes suddenly shoot open and stare into the hollow eye sockets of the mask. Memento mori, Stuart tells her as she looks at him in confusion. All she manages out is Birdman, before her muscles lock up and her breathing stops. He strokes her hair gently and admires his work. She is silent, and he knows he has done a good job. God's work. Packing his utensils back into his bag, he heads back home. He has work tomorrow. Life goes on. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Tony was lying on the operating table after being in a near-fatal accident. The doctors were performing an emergency operation on him, and they knew that he was dying. but they kept trying to save him. God knows enough people died in this hospital lately, a doctor said. Tony could hear them speaking. Suddenly he heard one of the nurses say, "We have lost all vital signs." He then found himself falling in through a tunnel, and he remembered hearing about a dark tunnel and a light people see just before they die. He then was looking down at the operation table from floating above. He wondered, was this an out-of-body experience? Was he dead? He must be if there were no vital signs. Then suddenly he heard a nurse speaking to him. "Don't give up. It's not your time to go. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Don't give up whatever you do. Keep fighting." The nurse had a strong Irish accent. She continued to speak. "Tony, you have so much more to do in this world. Don't give up. Come back. Don't leave. Your time to go is not now." Suddenly, Tony wasn't floating over the bed anymore, but he was back in his body and could hear a doctor say, "Wow, that was something else. He was almost gone for 10 whole minutes." A nurse said, "Vital signs are stable." Tony smiled, and a few minutes later he was speaking to the nurse. But he realised it wasn't the nurse that saved him by asking him to not give up. The nurse said, "You gave us all a fright, Tony, but what just happened was nothing short of a miracle. You were dead for 10 whole minutes." Tony said, "Could I please thank the nurse with the Irish accent, please? She kept telling me don't give up, and that is what made me pull back from crossing over." The doctor said, "Tony, there is no one here with an Irish accent." "Well, luckily we don't have the nurse with that accent around her anymore." Tony asked, "Why? What's wrong with her?" The nurse said, "The only nurse around here with an accent from Ireland was this crazy woman. She murdered 14 of our patients, and when she was found out, she shot herself in the head. Just before she did shoot herself, she started rambling on about she would make sure we all pay for getting her caught." Suddenly the woman froze, and the doctors, when the nurse with the accent from Ireland appeared and said, "I made my penance after I killed those patients, and I proved it by bringing this patient back to life. But as for the doctors and nurses, who were the reason I was caught experimenting with murder, well, that's a different story. Within 2 minutes, everyone in the room were killed besides Tony. Soon after, the police were called, and Tony was arrested for multiple homicide of the nurses and doctors that were killed by the ghost of the nurse who saved him." Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Sharon was looking for a place to rent, and she spent hours and hours looking through different rooms and apartments. The prices were way out of her budget. She felt like she would have to have a super high-paying job to even pay the rent, don't mind the cost of living on top of that. She kept looking at different houses, and there was a great choice, but that great choice came with an even greater price, and not greater as in value, but greater as in a very high price. She was about to give up when she had to look twice to see, was she seeing things, or were her eyes playing tricks on her from staring at the screen for so long? There was a really nice apartment complex in what looked like a lovely neighbourhood near where she wanted to rent. What caught her eye was rent a room and a living room plus use of swimming pool, entirely free in this beautiful spacious house in a beautiful neighbourhood. You will be able to stay indefinitely, but just need to take part in a training session to help finding ways of bettering ourselves through a modern day type of experimental wellness therapy. When she scrolled down to the bottom of the page, under the photo of the complex, it had written in bold red writing, "If interested, please reply as soon as possible, as there is only a few positions to be filled." The complex can hold plenty people, as it has more than 30 spacious bedrooms and leisure rooms, etc. But apply right away if interested, before spaces are gone. Sharon didn't even begin to consider not applying when she had already clicked on the button below which said apply now. She filled in all the information and was delighted when she got a reply back saying, "Thank you for applying to stay in the Wellness Mansion. You just have started the journey to changing your life to bring out the best in you." Sharon wondered what exactly did the experimental wellness therapy mean, but she guessed it couldn't mean anything bad. A week later, Sharon was in her new room in the Wellness Mansion. She felt like being in a posh hotel. Her room had a TV and was decorated beautifully. She was lying on her bed relaxing, scrolling through Instagram on her phone when a man entered. He smiled and said, "Hello Sharon, and good evening to you. Welcome to the Wellness Mansion. You must have read what it said on the site about this being the first step of your journey to becoming a better you. And that is true. But that phone you were just looking at, I'm afraid, has to go. You will not have to worry about food or any bills, just as once you 100% apply yourself to this therapy." Sharon said, "Well, I'm afraid I need my phone, as I have to stay up to date with all my social media feeds. But don't worry, I won't be on my phone all the time." The man said, "I'm very sorry, dear. I need your phone right now, or else I'm afraid you need to exit this Wellness Mansion and make room for someone who will apply themselves fully to our rules." Sharon felt a pang of fear and dread, wondering what he meant by apply themselves fully to our rules. Suddenly she feared she just made a terrible mistake coming to the Wellness Mansion. A few hours later, the same man came into her room and said, "Okay dear, we will be doing the first test run of what's to come. You might think this is a bit of real heavy work and feel like not even trying, but if you do, then I'm afraid you will not be able to live in this wonderful house rent-free. But if you do apply yourself to this very, very simple test, then you, my dear, will be qualified to stay here, and we will teach you to be the best version of you." What Sharon was told to do was do exercise until an alarm went off. She was given different exercises and thought it would be just a few minutes, but she nearly passed out a few times as each exercise went on for what seemed like hours. Each time the alarm went off, she just had a few minutes to organise what she needed for the next one and had to do the exercise non-stop until the alarm went off. After the last alarm went, the man entered Sharon's room and clapped, saying, "Well done, my dear. You did absolutely fabulous. You now have full use of this house." The next day, Sharon was walking down the hall when a man said to her, "Hello, how are you doing?" Sharon said, "I'm great, thanks. I'm a bit stressed though, about what I was made do last night." The man's pleasant expression changed, and he grabbed Sharon by the throat and said, "Don't complain. You don't know how good you have it. Just do what you're told, and if not, then you will suffer. But on the other hand, if you do what you're told, you will gain more than happiness. You will gain euphoria." Sharon was shaking with fear after the man said what he said. He let go of her, and she ran back into her room and shut the door. She shook in fear, realizing that there was no bolt in the inside to lock herself in. The next day, she was made do extreme exercises for hours and hours, and when she told them she wanted to go home, a man gave her a phone to scroll through the photos and said, "That is what happened the last person who wanted to go home." She nearly got sick when she saw different photos of a person being brutally tortured in different ways. There was a weird red siren in the background where the man was being tortured. She asked what was the siren there for. The man said, "Thanks for showing interest. Well, just put it this way. Hopefully you will never see that siren go red and flash, because if you do, then that's the end of you." Suddenly Sharon got her fork and stuck it in the man's eye while she stuck the knife in his neck and ran out the door. She was feeling lucky that no one was in the hall to stop her, and before she knew it, luckily she was outside, safe in the street. She ran across the road and an elderly lady said, "Oh my goodness, dear, what's wrong? Please come in, dear." Sharon was shouting, "Help me, call the police, please call the police," and was about to go in the door when she saw something in the window of the woman's house. It was a red siren. The man's words came flooding back to her. Hopefully she will never see the siren flash, because if she did, it was the end of her. Sharon had realized the woman must have been one of them. She ran down the street, but as she ran, she noticed on every single window, in every single house, there was a red siren flash. She panicked as she was surrounded by people all over the street, and she knew there was no escape. I'm safe here. They definitely wouldn't think to look for me here. I can't tell you where here is, because they might get to you, and thereby get to me. But you're part of me, so basically know where here is. You're in my head, so if you delve deep enough and focus intently, you can see where I am. But there's no need for such. I'm safe, and so you are too. They're dangerous, and our safety is my top concern. I can't let them get to us. I've seen what they're capable of, and it's not fun looking. The blood streamed down the sidewalk. The exit site of the bullet looked like a small creature had crawled out of his head. It was a gaping hole, his brown hair matted to what was left of his skull by the scarlet mess. His scrawny arms lay motionless at his side, covered in dirt accumulated on the walkway, blood seeping into his t-shirt. A stain like that definitely won't come out. A small crowd had gathered and looked on, in a mixture of awe and disgust. It was such a grotesque horror, committed on such a beautiful day. Rather warm for autumn, but nonetheless still an overall great day. Besides, for the man with his brain painting the sidewalk, it definitely wasn't a great day for him. The crowd spoke in low murmurs, no one able to make sense of the atrocious act committed in the city centre in broad daylight. Cars continued to drive by, each stopping briefly to try and catch a glimpse of the drama evidently unfolding on the sidewalk. The buildings enclosing the street on both sides seemed to blend into the background. There was no one to focus on but him. He must have known too much about them. This is what happens when you know too much. This is why you need to protect us. He was probably a father, computer technician, or something equally boring, and now look at him. The ambulance sirens caused everyone to divert their attention. Strange no police had shown up. I'm sure many a concerned civilian had called it in. Now only an ambulance. Curiosity killed the cat. This was my first encounter with their stronghold on the public. Crazy, huh? A fire in the building I lived in was another danger alert. The fire killed one of the guys I knew who stayed on the 3rd floor. He was a pretty cool guy. We'd played a few pickup games of basketball together at the community centre courts a few times. He too must have known too much about them. Incredible the lengths they'd go to get rid of him. Starting a fire in an apartment building where hundreds of people live. Strangely enough, he was the only death in the fire. The fire department issued a statement that the lit cigarette he fell asleep with was the cause of the fire. I was among the crowd outside the building, being tendered to by paramedics when they wheeled his charred corpse out the smoking remnants of our communal home. His once white skin was now a very reddish pink in most parts. The rest of him was crispy black. Blood seeped out through the cracks in the now hardened skin and gave colour to the white sheet that did a poor job of concealing the abomination he had become. I may not be a smart man, but I know better to believe the nonsense story the fire department gave about the cause of the fire. It wasn't a cigarette, it was them. The crispy man had known too much, and they dealt with him. The embers of the fire glowed dimly in the darkness of the night. It was almost beautiful, the flashing lights of the fire truck and shouts and cries of the now homeless people faded into the background. They had struck again. My third and final encounter with their destructive power was by far the worst. It was the boot up my ass I needed to get us out to safety. It was all the confirmation I needed to know they posed a real threat to us. I didn't know the guy, but whoever he was, he didn't deserve to die the way he did. I was taking a walk through the park to clear my mind of all the negativity and stress I'd been inflicted with, when my thoughts were dragged instantly back to the park. I had stumbled and nearly tripped into almost dark park. I looked down annoyed to see what had caused my stumble. There in my path was the abdomen of a man. His abdomen was dressed impeccably, so it was fair to assume his grand night had come to an abrupt end. I was at a loss for words and didn't know what to do. My first thought was to locate the rest of his body. Leaving the abdomen donned in a tuxedo jacket, I walked slowly down the path, scanning left and right for parts of the man. Boy, did I find them. He had been completely ripped apart. Strewn on both sides of the path were his hands, the rest of his arms, his feet in what looked like expensive dress shoes, and the legs. The head, however, was nowhere to be found. Unperturbed, I continued my search. The path led me to the gate of a park, where my search proved fruitful. Mounted on the spikes above the gate was the stranger's head. They had no respect for the dead. How could they violate the man like this? All because he knew too much. Leaving the head on the gate, I left in a hurry. No point summoning the police. They would not get involved with these people. Now, do you see why I must do all I can to ensure our safety? These people know no bounds. They have no regard for the law or human life. All this debt because of the knowledge people had acquired. Knowledge is power, but in this case, it also grounds for debt. Unfortunately for us, I am knowledgeable. As I'm sure you can guess, we're next on the hit list. I won't tell you exactly what it is I know, so if they get to be first, they might spare you for your ignorance. You must be wondering why I fear for you, because as I said, you're part of me. You know what I know. But upon my death the bond might break, therefore you won't know it anymore, thus being spared. That however is worst case scenario, I would rather just keep us both alive. Do you hear that? The buzzing? I think they found me. We've been compromised. Sorry, old pal. This is the end of the road. The door is opening now. Oh God, how are they getting in? The door has no handles, so how? Oh God. The door opened, and the nurses walked into the padded room. He sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, shouting, straitjacket sitting tightly around him. Every time he was scheduled to get his medicine, he did this, screaming and shouting about them and knowledge. Once sedated, the nurses put the clozapine in his mouth and gave him enough water to wash them down. They then checked to make sure he swallowed the medication. Anthony had been admitted into the psychiatric ward of St. Bernard's Hospital over 3 years ago. He was found wandering the streets covered in blood by police after an extensive manhunt was launched following the deaths of 3 unrelated individuals. Brutal deaths, all found to be carried out by Anthony. He was sent to trial and proven extremely mentally unstable, earning him a lifetime stay in the padded room. The mind is a terrible thing to waste. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Death. That was the odour that occupied the room. The pungent smell of vomit and sweat was evident, but the stench of rotting, dead flesh was predominant. David looked fearfully at his mother, lying helpless on the bed. He knew she was sick, but the sight of her disease-eaten flesh made him feel an array of emotions. With fear being the front runner, he was scared for his mother. He did not want her to die, but the fear was also for his own well-being. The imminent fear that it could be contagious made him keep his distance. His father sat holding his mother's hand. The bits of the hand that remained, that is. The disease had stripped his caregiver of most of the muscle and flesh she had once used to nurture and care for him. All the money and power his father had was of no use against a disease such as this. World-renowned doctors and specialists had been called as soon as his mother had exhibited signs of the sickness, all to no avail. Disease does not discriminate. Janice was suffering just as the poor do, dying with no means of recovery. Necrotizing facets was the name for what ailed his mother. He had heard it on the news a while before he saw it plague his mother, the flesh-eating disease. Or if the stories he had heard around school before it closed were anything to go on, the zombie disease was a more applicable diagnosis. The fever and nausea were the first symptoms. Janice was unable to take her son to school, lying weak in her bed with her temperature climbing steadily. David's father, Jonathan, put it down to a bug of sorts, and simply picked up the slack by doing the duties around the house his wife was unable to do. By the second week of sickness, Janice was completely unable to move, with her fingers and toes taking on a darkish hue. David had continued to go to school and had heard of many of the kids talk about other people suffering from a similar sounding sickness. But in all the stories he had heard, none of them ended well. Fearing for his mother's health, David repeated these stories to his father, only to be met with reassurance and comfort. That reassurance and comfort proved to be meaningless, as he now sat looking at the disease-riddled body of his mother, flesh eaten beyond comprehension, holes gaping in places unimaginable. Jonathan had tried his best by all means. As soon as he saw his wife's condition deteriorate, a number of doctors were called for consultation. They all came to the same prognosis. According to the doctors looking after her, she was one of the first to be stricken by the disease, and just as the others had, her condition had progressed. Their only suggestion was to move her to the hospital wing they had designated to those afflicted with the disease. Before moving her, Jonathan thought to take David to see the hospital where they would care for his mother. They discussed the matter with her and decided to make the trip the next day. "You've been avoiding me, baby," Janice said once alone with David. "I'm just scared, Mum. I don't want you to die," came David's reply. Laughing, Janice told David, "That's not something you need to worry about, my son. What you do need to worry about is how comfy my room there is going to be," joining in with his mother's laughter. David finally dropped his inhibitions and sat close to his mother. Resting his head on her bed, she stroked his head as he fell asleep. He had not slept long at the bedside of his mother, but his dreams were those of zombies and those that hunted. Necrotizing Facetus. His father woke him to go to bed, and the disturbance of the dreams was a thorough welcome by David. Walking half asleep towards the door, he could but help glance back at his mother. He could feel the tears well up as the woman lying in the bed closely resembled those creatures that haunted his dream. The drive to the hospital the next day was excruciating. The silence seemed to drill deep into David's core as he sat next to his father. He could feel the sadness and pain emanating from the man he had always viewed as an absolute pillar of strength and wisdom. When the journey had finally ended and they sat in the car park of the hospital, David suddenly burst into tears. The stark reality of the possibility of losing his mother had hit him like a freightliner moving at remarkable speeds. His father hesitated for a second, unsure of what the appropriate response would be, given that he too felt so unable to do anything he wanted to cry to. He held his son. The two embraced tightly and said nothing. No words could have helped either feel better. The dark clouds drifting in the sky outside them closely resembled the way both of them felt inside, cold and lost. The bright lights in the hospital corridor beat down on them. They winced as they walked in, waiting for their eyes to adjust. "Good morning. We're here to view and book a room in the CDC wing, please," Jonathan asked. We're sorry to inform you. There has been an incident in the CDC room, sir. We're not accepting any new patients at the moment." "What? That's preposterous. What kind of incident?" Jonathan shouted at the nurse. Before she could answer, the doors to the CDC wing burst open, and what looked like the remains of a man ran through the doors, leaving footprints of blood behind him. He lunged at a woman seated on the chairs outside the Centre for Disease Control, and people were too shocked to respond. Pinning her down, Jonathan and David could see the sick man biting and clawing at the woman's face. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. He had more holes in him than flesh. Bits of bone could be seen through the loose hanging hospital gown that covered the eaten man. The disease had all but devoured his body, and it was a miracle he was able to move. "Does that answer your question, sir?" the nurse screeched as she made a beeline for the exit. Dragging David, Jonathan followed the panicked crowds through the door and towards the car park. The only people left in the hospital were the zombie-looking individual and his victim. Well, what was left of her after he had eaten his fill and pulled all her intestines out through the hole he had chewed in her stomach. Rushing to get in the car, David and Jonathan said nothing as they ran and pushed their way through the crowds to get where they were going. Locking themselves in their car, they merely sat where they were, not moving and not saying anything, bursting into tears once again. David was the only one to finally break the silence. "We have to get home to Mom, Dad." As they pulled into the driveway, Jonathan had already begun giving David instructions. "As soon as we get in, you need to go up to your room and pack a bag. We're going to go straight to the airport and get on a plane to India. Your Uncle Kieran mentioned something about doctors working and stuff like this there. We'll take your mother, and this will be all sorted out. Come straight to the room when you're packed." Almost as soon as the car was stationary, David leapt out of the car and ran up the driveway and into his house. Jonathan was close behind. As Jonathan made his way into his bedroom, he could hear his son cursing and banging his cupboard doors. He too would pack a bag for him and his wife, and they would leave to a safer place. Having finished packing some clothes into a bag, David closed it and ran out of his room. The tears had begun to dry, and a smile crept over his face at the thought of 3 of them flying to India to make Mum better. Who knows, maybe Uncle Kieran would be waiting at the airport for them. Bursting through the door of his parents' room, the smile that had recently formed once again dissolved to tears. There would be no trip to the airport, let alone India. Straddling her husband on their bed, David could see his mother. Her head was buried in her husband's chest as she feasted. Jonathan's hand dangled off the bed, drenched in his own blood. The only thing David could hear over his loud breaths was the grotesque sound of his mother chewing and slurping the bits of flesh and blood she was stuffing her face with. Standing there frozen, David saw his mother turn to face him. What now looked him in the eye was not his mother. Blood dripping from its chin, dead eyes staring. It stood up, leaving Jonathan lying on the bed with holes chewed in his body. David felt his legs give out. "Mom?" he said weakly, tears streaming down his cheeks, hoping something inside of the creature would hear and recognize her son, and perhaps grant him mercy. The ground seemed to shake as it took a step towards him. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jessie and her friend Kayla were at home watching a horror movie when they started talking about the local legend, Slender Man. Jessie was saying, Slender Man is real. He isn't just a made-up character. Kayla said, do you really expect me to believe you that a 10-foot tin man is real and you have seen him? Why didn't you take a photo of him with your phone then? Jessie was getting annoyed and gave Kayla an angry look and said, okay, you don't believe me? Well, I can take you to the woods tomorrow to meet a friend of mine which will prove Slender Man is real. Kayla replied, okay, you're on. The next night Jessie and Kayla went out to the woods. They were walking down the woods when they saw a box with first clue written on it. Jessie asked Kayla to see what was inside. Kayla said, I suppose you think I'm afraid to open it. Then she opened it and retrieved a map where to go, looking for the next clue. As they walked about 10 minutes deep into the woods, they came across the next clue, which was another box. Kayla opened it again, and there was a map which apparently would lead them to the proof of Slender Man. As they walked towards where the map led them, there was a very high tree with a box hanging from it, saying proof. Kaylee said to Jessie, there's no way I'm climbing that tree. Jessie said, turn around and close your eyes for 5 seconds. Then you can turn back around again and open them. Kayla said, what are you playing at? Jessie said, losing her patience, do you want to see the proof of Slender Man or not? Kayla turned around and counted to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When she turned back, Jessie had the box next to her on the ground. Kayla asked her, how did you climb way up there so fast? And what about this friend of yours you promised you'd show me? Where is he or she? Show me the proof of Slender Man being real. You told me your friend would show me the proof of Slender Man being real. How long do I have to wait to see the proof? Let me answer your first question first, and the second after, Jessie said. First, I didn't climb the tree, and the answer to your second question is, my friend is over there, and he is the one who picked the box from the tree. Jessie pointed over towards the trees, and Kayla screamed when she saw the Slender Man. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. It was a Friday night, and Sarah's parents were going out for a meal. They told her to be careful and to not answer the door to anyone. Sarah's parents were very cautious and even weren't going to go out for a meal at all because for the last few weeks in their town there were home invasions in different houses. Luckily, no one was hurt, but they didn't take any precautions, so they ran through a list of things she should do if anyone knocks at the door or acts strange. After her parents left, Sarah grabbed a drink from the fridge and then sat down to watch a good horror movie. She wasn't worried about any caller to the door, and she knew it was locked and she could call 911 if anything did happen. But her brave attitude changed fast when her phone rang and there was a creepy voice on the other side. At first, Sarah thought it was one of her friends fooling and told them don't be so stupid. The calls persisted during the night. She had rang a lot of her friends in the meantime, but none of them called her, according to them. Jack, Sarah's friend, told her, "Look, if I ever get prank calls, what I do is get a whistle and whistle as hard as I can and as loud as I can down through the phone. It will sure stop them from calling, trust me." Sarah was going to put that plan into action, and she waited to the phone ring again. She made sure that it was none of her friends, so she waited until she heard the creepy voice begin to speak again. So Sarah got her whistle and blew it as hard as she could through her phone. With that, she could hear a scream from behind her sofa, and she turned around to see a person in a ski mask holding a knife. She ran towards the door to open it, but the person grabbed her and lunged a knife into her. She fell on the ground, bleeding very heavy as the person took off their mask. She froze in horror when she looked in a mirror, and she could see herself holding a mask. Then she snapped out of her dream. She had lost time again. She wondered what had happened. Her doctor told her when she has blackouts, she imagines things. Her doctor said she has to take her medication because during her blackouts, she could hurt herself or others. She looked down on the ground at the door. Her parents lay in a pool of blood, and there was a knife in her hand. Sarah began to cry, knowing she had just killed her mom and dad.
Stop!
Hello, my name is Brian. Some people have a genuine phobia against clowns. They are genuinely petrified of them. I don't have that phobia. I have something much worse. I have a good reason to fear clowns, and Ferris wheels, and carnivals. The reason will become very clear as I go on and tell you my story, and tell you exactly what happened to me and two of my friends. After this story, you will see why I never ever visit the carnival when it visits my town. It was a few years ago me and my friends visited the local carnival, and at the time we had so much fun. You see, it wasn't what happened to us in the carnival freaked us out, no way. It was what happened afterwards. We were eating popcorn, we went on the Ferris wheel, and laughed so much at the silly clown who was extra funny. But that night when I got home, I was tired and went straight to bed. I must have fell asleep fast because I had such a bad nightmare that the clown in the carnival was holding a knife up to me and was about to kill me. There was all weird stuff happening in the nightmare. The next day in school, I was telling my friends about the nightmare, and they surprised me and shocked me by explaining to me in detail the same dream. But instead of what happened to me in the dream, it happened to them when they had their dream. Exactly the same, besides them being killed instead of me. Things don't end there though. The weirdest part about it is that no one in my town remembered any carnival coming this year. They said the last time the carnival came was last year. Me and my friends didn't have a clue what was happening because the three of us knew we were all at the carnival just 2 nights ago, and that night we all had the same dream. When the summer came, there was a poster for the carnival out, and to my surprise there was a photo of the exact same clown that tried to kill me in my dream. And before the dream, I have never
ever laid my eyes on the clown, I froze in fear, knowing that it was exactly the same clown that was in my dream, and wondered how the hell this was happening. It's not as if I had a memory of a clown like him before. Me and my friends stayed away from the carnival for the whole 5 nights they were there. The day after the carnival left, there was pandemonium around my town, as there were 2 kids missing. People were putting up posters, and when I looked at the posters, I saw 2 of my friends' faces. I felt content knowing I had stabbed and killed both of them, but I didn't know why. They were my friends. But then I heard a voice inside my head telling me, "You have passed this incredible plan of mine. I conducted from the other side. I was a killer in your town years and years ago, so many years that folk today would have forgotten about me. Yes, but I hate that they forgot about me. But thanks to me having the power to get into your dreams and harness the energy, even when you're awake, yes, daydreaming, and your daydreams became a reality, that has made me a very happy clown." I looked in the mirror and snapped out of my daydream, and when I looked in the mirror, I was dressed as a clown and was just after stabbing myself in the neck.
My wife and I bought a house that was quite cheap for the area, and that was 2 years ago. We have 2 daughters together. At first, everything was fine, and nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Then one day we would find every chair, pot, jar and other household objects all divided into 2 corners. One corner of the household objects had a red mark on them, while the other half of household objects had a blue mark. We tried putting things back to where they were supposed to go, but everything ended up being divided into their corners again. Then one day I awoke with a blue mark on my arm, and same with my oldest daughter. We both found ourselves with the other household objects that also had a blue mark on them. My wife and my youngest daughter had a red mark on them, and they awoke alongside the household objects that had a red mark on them as well. We then brought in a psychic, and she told us that the spirits from the married couple who used to live in this house are now finally divorcing in the afterlife. They have split up everything 50-50 and marked them red and blue. Red is for the deceased husband, and the blue is for the deceased wife. My wife and I looked at each other, as we both knew we would be taken away. We knew we had to get out of this house or sell it as quick as possible. Then one day, some of the household objects that were divided into red and blue had disappeared. Our daughters were part of the disappearance. The 2 spirits are slowly taking their 50-50 divorce splits. Me and my wife are just waiting for us to get taken now.
We had heard about the sickness for weeks. Rumors of people dropping in the streets, being run over by carriages and left to rot. No one would touch them for fear of being infected. In just hours, whole villages were seeing symptoms, hundreds dead in days. I lived in a small farming village with my mother and father. We were secluded where we lived. There were only 4 houses spread over 20 miles. People from the cities would drift by on their way to safety and tell us what they'd heard about the fever. But no one else came after a while. Not even the mailman. A week, a month, 2 months passed, and we hadn't seen a soul. My father and mother decided to leave, but I told them I couldn't come. The family that lived on the last farm east was very dear to us, and they had small children. I told my mother I would go to see if they were okay and ask if they would come with me. After that, I would follow my parents south to where my aunt lived. Mother cried, but I would not be swayed. I watched them leave as the sun rose over the dirt road. I had a 20-mile walk in front of me, and so I began. There are those who doubt my story after this point. Some say I'm simply lying. Others speculate I had the fever, and what I saw was only in my mind. I know I wasn't sick. I wish it was all a terrible hallucination, but I know what happened was real. It is midnight on the 3rd of November, 1723. I am a condemned woman. I am scheduled to be hanged in the morning. I have no reasons left to lie. This document will be seen only after I'm dead. Let this be my last testament. As I walked the path, I noticed a distinct silence in the trees. Sounds I had heard all my life were simply gone. And then I heard her. She was coming down the path. A smile arched across her face. She moved lightly, almost skipping. Not a care in the world. A large crimson stain sat dark at the frayed neck of her dress. Blood. "Are you okay, miss?" I asked as she passed by. It wasn't until she was only inches from me that I recognized her. The look in her eyes and that terrible smile made it hard for me to notice at first, but now I could see it was Mrs. Shannon. She lived on the farm closest to ours. She had never been one to smile. She didn't look at me when I talked to her, only continued to sing. I assumed then that she had the illness, and her mind was gone. I watched her for a few minutes, and then turned and kept going. After about a minute, I looked back. She stood about 100 yards away with her back to me. Her head was turned sideways, listening. I ran the rest of the way. I arrived at the house just as the sun began to set. I knew something was wrong as soon as I laid my eyes on it. There were no cows in the pasture, no goats. I jogged to the front door and knocked. Nothing inside moved. Flies buzzed in the kitchen where dirty dishes sat out exposed. Maggots slithered on the plates, finishing what was left of a week-old dinner. A trail of blood led to the back of the house where the bedrooms were. I moved slowly. The smell was even worse here. Mr. Peters lay on the floor beside the bed. His neck was torn and blood had pooled black beneath him. He'd been dead for days. Something moved in the closet. I hadn't seen the children. I had to check. Though I have to admit at this point I was terrified. I tried to keep quiet as I opened the door. It was the eldest, James. He was cowering in the corner. I took him to his room and gave him some of the water and food I had brought. I asked him what happened. He told me the whole story. A few weeks ago, a drifter had come to town with a fever. Mrs. Shannon let him stay in her barn. He told her it wasn't the illness that made him sick now, but that he had been attacked by a vampire on the road. She thought he was delirious. After he died, she and her husband buried him in the cemetery. A few days later, Mr. Shannon told his wife he had seen the man outside. The drifter said he needed his shoes. They had fallen off while they were transporting his body. After a few moments, the man left. For the next few days, they were plagued by knocks at their door during the night. One of these nights, Mr. Shannon had enough. He went out with his gun and told the man he would shoot him if he didn't go. The man began to laugh hysterically. Mrs. Shannon didn't see what happened, but when morning came, she went out and saw her husband dead on the ground. James told me that a few days prior to my arriving, Mrs. Shannon came asking for help. She said her husband had crawled out of his grave and was trying to get into the house. James's parents turned her away, thinking she was either sick or telling the truth. Either way, they were too scared to open the door. Mrs. Shannon returned not long after. That big grin, those wild eyes, she smelled of rot. She would come in the night, sing songs outside their windows. He told me his 8-year-old sister Elizabeth was the first to die. For reasons no one could understand, she had gone out of bed just before dawn and walked outside. He remembers having dreamt of a girl screaming for help. When he awoke, he realized the sounds were real. They found her a few hours later, sitting against a tree, a few yards into the woods. All the joints in her body had been twisted the wrong way. Before they buried her, his father bound her broken wrists with a rope and salted the earth above her. After a few days of hiding in the house, they ran out of supplies and decided to leave. His mother was killed while trying to gather goats. James and his father took their guns and searched the woods for the vampire, but there was no sign of it. They left her body where it fell and followed the road north. When night came, they found themselves surrounded. They would hear laughter coming from the forest and running feet cutting across the path behind them. James swears he heard his mother calling for him to come into the woods. In a panic, they headed back to the house. His father was briefly attacked along the way, and by the time they got inside, he was just barely breathing. I asked James if he knew who it was that had killed his father, and he told me it was his sister, 6 days after she died. In the end, I decided it didn't matter if it was true or not. James was weak and needed help. There were still usable supplies at my house. We had to leave. It's safer in the day, he told me. He wouldn't budge. He wouldn't let me bury his father either, but at least he let me put the body outside. The silence was still palpable. There were no crickets, not even a gust of wind to make me feel better. It was as if someone had taken our little village and cut it out from the rest of the world. Before I went back inside, I scanned the tree line expecting to see only darkness. There was a small purple dress obscured by low branches near the edge of the forest. At first I was elated. I could tell it was Elizabeth. She was caked in dirt. I thought because she had gotten lost in the woods and finally found her way out. I took a few steps toward her. She returned the favor and started walking to me. Her bones were all broken. She limped across the road like a puppet on strings. Each step she took would tear a new piece of flesh or crack another bit of bone. With absolute horror, I studied her face. She only smiled and held out her arms to me, wrists still bound. I ran back inside. James and I barricaded ourselves in the back bedroom and waited. I turned the lantern down to just barely a spark. We sat in the dark and listened. We heard his mother calling outside. "James, Mommy's waiting." I could see the tears dripping down his cheeks. Elizabeth put her eyes between the cracks in the wood. "Don't you miss us, brother?" James begged her to leave. She said she would, but first she had to tell him something. He leaned in near the wall and she whispered in his ear. Then she left as promised. James sat without saying a word. He picked up the lantern and raised the flame. I asked if he was okay. He opened the globe and poured the oil down his throat. In seconds, he was covered in flames. I screamed. I wanted to help him, but there was no way. The room was overcome in just moments. I rushed to escape. Smoke filled every inch of the space. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. By the time I stumbled outside, it was almost dawn. I was so overcome by the smoke in my lungs that I lost consciousness. When I awoke, there was nothing left of the house or of James. A gash ran across my wrist. I had lost a lot of blood in the night, but I could still move. I tore a piece of my dress and wrapped the wound. When I could walk, I wandered north towards the closest town. Somewhere along the way, I heard the light and ringing of a tiny bell. I came across a cemetery and saw that the bell I was hearing was from a grave. Someone inside was pulling it as if to say they had been buried alive. I walked to it, and as I did, another bell began to ring. Then another and another. I ran and never looked back. I thought I'd hurt my wrist while leaving the house, but now I realize that while I was unconscious lying on the grass, they fed. In a few hours, I'll be put to death for something I did not do. The people here think themselves civilized. They don't believe in monsters. I tried to warn them, but they won't listen, won't take precautions. They'll bury me tonight, and tomorrow morning, I'll be ringing my own bell.
Dig deeper at sessionsx.tumblr.com.
Sharon was walking down the street, sure that someone was following her. She didn't dare look behind, as she would rather just walk on and hopefully get to somewhere where there were people around, other than turn around and have someone attack her. It was getting dark, and she saw a train station across the road, so she walked across to it. When she got into the station, thankfully there were other people in the platform, but strangely, she didn't feel any bit safer. She thought about getting on a train, but decided to just wait by a group of people first to gather herself. She assumed it was just her paranoia, but there was something bothering her that she didn't know what it was. People were acting strange, and she had noticed there were police around. She had wondered why there was no train, as she was standing there for a few minutes now. There were lots of people looking down in the track, across a tape that said "Police line, do not cross." She didn't realise sooner because she seemed to be in a daze, wondering why she was feeling so strange. She wondered what all the people were looking at, and when she walked over and looked down, she screamed with horror as she looked down at herself, dead on the train line. She was screaming and screaming but no one seemed to take any notice of her. She had then noticed someone had made eye contact with her, and they seemed to notice her. They walked over to her and said, "Did you just realize you're like me, one of the dead?" She spoke on. "Don't worry, it gets better. I watch the news to see where there are local deaths. That way at least you could talk to someone." Sharon froze, taking in the words that the girl was telling her, realizing she was dead. Jane was knitting in her living room. She was very happy knitting, as always, because it always relaxed her and took away a lot of stress if she was feeling stressed. Suddenly, she spotted something out of the corner of her eye. There was a woman who seemed to be exhausted, resting up against her wall outside. She looked out the window, and the woman didn't seem to see her. Jane felt very sorry for the woman and wondered, was she in a weakness? So she went outside and asked her would she like to come into her house for a cup of tea. A few minutes later, the woman sat down at Jane's table, and Jane brought her a cup of tea. The woman said, "Thanks very much. You did your good deed for the day." She drank her tea. Then Jane nearly fainted with shock when the woman took out a gun and pointed it at Jane. The woman said, "Okay, I know you have lots of money in this house and jewellery, so hand it over or I'm going to shoot you." Suddenly the woman felt kind of dizzy. The gun lowered against her will and then fell to the ground. A few minutes later the woman came around. She must have fell asleep. Jane was standing in front of her smiling. It had then hit her that her tea had been drugged. The woman was tied to a chair and gagged, while Jane smiled at her and said, "You see, I actually thought you were tired. I thought you were in a weakness, and I would have still tortured you. But now that I know you were trying to rob me, well, that brings the torture to another level." Jane took out a drill and smiled, then drilled into the woman's knees as tears were rolling down her cheeks. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Brenda and Tony were driving along the countryside on a December night. They were on a road trip for 2 weeks as a part of unwinding from a lot of hard work doing up their new house. The plan was to stay in several motels along the way and enjoy the road trip and eating out in diners and enjoying the scenery in between. It was just about getting dark when Brenda was surprised to see a hitchhiker on the road. She said to Tony, "Do you see that?" Tony said, "Yeah, I wonder who is it, way out here." The couple decided to stop, and the hitchhiker said, "Hi there, my name is Paul. I would really love if you could give me a drive just a few miles up the road to the next motel, please. I took the wrong bus and I'm walking miles." Tony said, "Sure, hop in the back." The man's name was Peter. When he was in the back, he began to speak. I was sure happy to see you guys come along. I must have been walking for miles. I was about to drop unconscious with tiredness from all the walking, and believe me, I'm not fit enough to walk that long. But ye guys, where are ye from? Let me guess, the big city, or maybe you're from the suburbs. Maybe you're the type of people that look down on folk like me. Brenda and Tony found that comment to be strange. Tony said, "Excuse me? Why would we look down on you?" Peter suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it to Brenda's head and said, "I'll tell you why you look down on me, because I've a gun held to your girlfriend, or is it your wife's head, and you're probably saying to yourself, I'm crazy." Tony said in a voice filled with fear and shock, "What the hell, man? Put away that gun." Peter said, "I do the talking around here, now keep driving." Brenda began to feel around her pocket for her phone and pretended to sneeze, to look down and press 911. When she did, she kept the phone on, hoping it would be traced. Tony said, "Look man, I don't know what's going on, okay? But I know that we did nothing to you, so please just put the gun away." Suddenly Peter shouted, "Stop the damn car." Brenda shouted, "Please, no, please stop, just leave us alone." When the car stopped, Peter shot Tony in the back of his head, and he died instantly. The hitchhiker shouted to Brenda, "You're lucky I'm not going to kill you, bitch," and he ran out of the car. Brenda picked the phone up and said to the 911 operator, "Please help me, please, my husband has just been killed by some guy we picked up." 10 minutes later, the police arrived and took a statement from Brenda. Brenda was sitting inside her home that herself and Tony had recently refurbished. There was a noise at the door, and a figure walked into the room. She could see that it was Peter the hitchhiker. He pulled out a gun and pointed at her. Then he smiled and said, "Bang, bang." She smiled back at him and said, "I have your money, and thanks for taking this job." He actually was cheating on me all the while we were doing up our new home. Peter said, "I actually must give you credit for this idea and coming up with the 911 call, etc. But as much as I'd love to stay around for tea, I need to get going, because if your police or neighbours see me, then who knows, tongues might start wagging and they might ask questions." Brenda asked, "What do you mean? How will they trace you to all this? They never even saw your face." Peter said, "I know, but I still have to tie up loose ends." Brenda said, "What do you mean?" Peter said, "Don't worry, it will be over soon." He lifted the gun and shot Brenda in her head. Then he walked into her bedroom and opened up her safe with her own finger he cut off just a minute ago. He was going to just go ahead and murder her husband for $100,000, but she had too much a big mouth and told him about a safe full of diamonds that only her fingerprint would open. He smiled when he looked at all the diamonds. Then suddenly he heard a ticking sound. He wondered what it was. He looked around the room to see. Suddenly all the doors and windows locked. He assumed it was some sort of alarm from the safe being opened at a time that wasn't scheduled. He heard the ticking get louder as he looked under the bed and saw that it was a bomb. From the timer he saw that it would detonate in 10 minutes. For the next 10 minutes he looked around for a way out of the house, but when the 10th minute came, he exploded with the house.
Stephanie had schizophrenia and could see things that weren't really there. It could happen her anywhere. She really believed the things she saw were real, which was when she first saw and heard a baby cry next door. She wondered, was she just imagining things? But what really made her paranoid was last week she saw her next door neighbour, Sarah, look around when she came out of her car to see was anyone looking, and she was holding a baby. She knew what she saw, but even though she saw that, she first thought maybe she had imagined the whole thing until she heard the baby cry a few more nights. She told her parents, but they didn't want to know. Her dad just told her that she was imagining it all, and if she went to the police about her next door neighbour kidnapping a baby, then she would be put away. They would say that her hallucinations are causing other people harm and could cause herself harm. Stephanie didn't know what to do, but she knew what she saw and knew it wasn't just one of her imaginations. She said to her mom, "Mom, we need to call the police and get them to go to that woman's house because she definitely is hiding a baby in there. You know she told us many times she is living alone, and why would she say that if she had a baby? Plus, if she is babysitting a baby and if it's all legit, then the police will know and she won't get into trouble, but we can't just keep quiet and do nothing." Stephanie's mom, Greta, said, "Sweetie, you have seen so many different monsters and demons and whatever else that aren't there. This is just another one of those." Stephanie said, "Please, Mom, just go over and ask the lady is there a baby with her and who does it belong to." Her mom sighed and told her to get some sleep. The next day, Stephanie came into her kitchen for her breakfast and said to her dad, "Where's Mom?" Her dad said, "I tried to stop her. She's actually gone over to our neighbour's house confronting her about your wild accusations that obviously are not true." Stephanie ran out the door before he could say anything else. She ran over to her neighbour's house and broke a window, then climbed in. When she was in the room, her mom was standing next to her neighbour, who was pointing a gun at her, and she turned to look at Stephanie and said, Well, look who has joined the party. Your mom here asked me whose baby I had in my house. Well, it's your damn father's baby. He decided to knock me up and didn't tell me keep the baby quiet because people will only start talking. Now I can't have anything come between me and your dad. You see, he loves me way more than you and your mom." Suddenly, Stephanie's mom ran and tried to grab the gun out of the woman's hand, and then the gun went off. They both looked at the door to see it was her dad who was just entering the room. He fell down on the ground as the bullet hit him. He looked up at his wife and said, before dying, "What? Why?" Stephanie's mom still had the gun in her hand and shot the woman who was running at her with a knife. Stephanie said, "Mom, tell the police it was me. I have schizophrenia. They will let me off." Stephanie's mom said, "No, I did this. I will tell the truth." A few minutes later, the police arrived, and a police officer said, "Police, is there anyone else in the house?" Stephanie said, "That woman tried to kill us, and she shot my dad." The police officer looked at Stephanie's mom and said, "I'm afraid you have to come to the police station with me." Stephanie said, "Not her, the other woman." The police officer said, "What other woman?" Stephanie's mom was smiling, in a daze, talking to herself. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Joe was a therapist that saw lots of different patients with different problems, but little did he know that one of his patients would create a huge problem for him. Joe was having an affair with a lady called Lucy, but unluckily for Joe, one of his patients, Tom, spotted them kissing on the street one night. Joe was kicking himself how stupid he was, but his patient Tom would not give up on it. He knew he would not give up, ever, until he got what he wanted. He knew that was his MO. Joe worried about it a lot, until one session Joe had a plan. Tom had threatened Joe he would tell his wife about the affair, and Joe knew he wasn't kidding. But Joe came up with a plan that he knew would work. Joe said to Tom, "Okay, Tom, I know that I've been sitting here telling you for months about you having to control your urges, and I know that you have some crazy fantasies that would get most people locked up in prison. But I have an idea for you. I created a plan that you could live out one of your fantasies that you were always talking about. This fantasy, Tom, is what I'm talking about. This fantasy would get you locked up, and I mean locked up for a very long time. But what I'm getting at, Tom, is I can make this happen for you. I can make this fantasy become a reality with no repercussions." Tom gave Joe a curious look, wondering what he was about to say. Then he said, "What is this plan of yours, may I ask?" Joe took a breath and said, "Okay, well, I never gave in to one of my wife's fantasies, for the simple fact I know this might sound hypocritical when I'm a cheater myself, but I would never want my wife to sleep with another man. However, it is one of her fantasies to a stranger walk into her bedroom in the middle of the night and have sex with her. Now, what I am offering you is that chance to you be that stranger to walk in and have sex with my wife. But only if you promise me you won't breathe a word of my affair to her, and don't ever breathe a word to her or anyone else." Tom sat back smiling, then said, "Now, I must say, that sounds like a plan." Joe and Tom spoke for another 15 minutes, organising to him call over tomorrow night. He gave his address and time. The next session Joe was feeling a lot better, as he knew Tom loved the plan, and he had promised not to tell his wife. Now that he is giving him the chance of having sex with her. Lisa was Joe's next patient. She was beaten by her husband for months before she finally had the opportunity to leave him. Joe asked how things were going. Lisa said, "I am so jumpy at everything. I can't even walk down the street without thinking my husband is following me. It's got so bad I sleep with a loaded gun." The next day Tom was happy about what was going to happen tonight. He smiled at the fact of him getting the chance to sleep with his therapist's wife. It all felt so exciting to him, a stranger walking into her room in the dark and having sex. That night he drove over to Joe's house. The door was open, and he walked up the stairs to the room where Joe told him his wife would be. It was exactly 1 a.m, and Joe told him he would be gone out for a walk. Tom walked up to the bed and could see Joe's wife lying there. He wondered, was she pretending to be asleep, or was she really?
He kneeled down next to her, about to kiss her, when her eyes opened and she screamed. She reached for her gun and shot Tom in the head. Joe looked out from his car across the street, smiling, knowing that Tom will be no more problem to him, and he drove off proud of himself for giving Tom the address of his patient Lucy, who he knew had a gun, right there beside her bed. He smiled, wondering, did she not realize she tells him every single session about having a gun by her bed? He knew she would blow Tom's head off instantly when she knew a stranger was in her house. Joe drove home and snuck back into bed. He was hoping his wife wouldn't wake up. Luckily for him, she didn't. He didn't want to have to explain anything. He was looking forward to the morning to tell his darling wife how much he loved her. When Sarah was small, she used to always be afraid of the dark. She hated the dark even more now, and she hated her own shadow. It started when she was 7 years old. Her and her twin sister were in their room, and they borrowed a horror book from their mom. Sarah was spooking her twin sister Katie out by pretending there was shadows going to get her, and they were on the wall. Sarah realized that she could make shadows on the wall and spooked Katie out every time she turned around. Suddenly something fell, and Katie got such a fright she backed back and fell off her bunk bed and out the top story window and was killed instantly. 15 years later, Sarah still gets flashbacks every time she sees her own shadow. She went to counselling and everything over it. She knew she had to get rid of her fear. She knew it was awful what happened, but she knew she had to finally put it behind her. She wasn't going to look at her shadow anymore. What Sarah couldn't see, as she was walking down the street, is her own shadow take out a knife. Suddenly she heard a voice saying, "Don't you think you can outrun your shadow?" Sarah was certain she had shook off her obsession of her shadow, but turned around because she knew that the voice was not in her head. She froze in horror, because in all the years she just saw her shadow, not her shadow moving differently than her, and definitely not her shadow holding a knife. Suddenly the shadow lunged the knife into her and walked into her, then healed instantly and walked down the street. Katie was practicing walking down the street. "Hi, my name is Sarah." Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Tom, Michael and Sam were watching the Squid Game in awe. They were familiar playing the Squid Game, the regular game, without the crazy stuff in the show. They were in awe of the colours used in the show and the action. Their parents wouldn't let them watch the show, which they all thought was lame because they all were 13. Tom said to Michael and Sam, "I have such an awesome idea. Why don't we play a game like they do in that show?" Sam turned to him and said, "Have you completely lost your mind? What next? You going to pull out a gun and give us one each to see who shoots the other?" Tom replied, No, listen, I have a really great idea. We can set up a bridge across the building's roof. My dad has a cool rope bridge we can use. All I need to do is throw it over from one roof to the next and tie it onto a pole. Whoever runs to the other side first wins, but whoever doesn't, well, then the person who's watching will cut the rope as soon as the winner is over. My dad is a cutting device that will cut it in seconds, and before ye ask, no, nobody's going to get killed. I have a bouncy safety thing my dad uses for the circus acts he does. Sam said, "That actually sounds pretty awesome, but who is going to cut the rope?" Tom said, "We will draw for it." A few minutes later they all drew what position they would play out of a jar, and Tom drew run, Michael drew run, and Sam drew watch and cut the rope. Michael said, "I don't want to play this game, it's stupid." Tom said in a mocking way, "Why, are you scared you're going to fall off and kill yourself from falling on a bouncy cushion cheese that is used in my dad's circus the whole time? You won't even hurt your leg if you fall even from that height." Michael was mad at his comments, and eventually Sam changed with him and decided to run instead of cutting the rope. When the game began, Sam and Tom both ran as fast as they could across the bridge. Michael thought he'd teach them a lesson and cut the rope to them both fall, knowing they wouldn't die anyway from falling on the bouncy safety cushion. As they reached the middle, he smiled as he cut the rope and then watched them scream as they fell. But his smile quickly changed when he heard a loud thud from below and people screaming. He looked down and had realised somehow the air must have escaped the cushion, and he realised his two friends fell to their death and were now lying dead in a pool of blood.
Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Susie was walking down the road one night in the countryside when she was surprised by hearing a phone box ring. She wondered who would be calling a public phone box, especially in the middle of nowhere. Well, it was near a bus stop, but besides that, no one was around, unless they were waiting for the bus, of course. She had decided to answer the phone when she was surprised to hear a man's voice. "Hello, is anyone there?" Susie said, "Hello, yes, I'm here. I'm sure you must have the wrong number. This is a public phone box." The man spoke again. "Oh, maybe I did call the wrong number, but thank you very much for answering and letting me know. I must say, you have a very nice voice. I am very sorry if I put you out of your way, but it was very nice to speak to you anyway. I guess you must be wondering why I'm calling a public phone box.
Well, it was very nice to speak to you. I hope you're having a good night. Susie felt strange, a stranger calling a phone box, asking her was she having a good night, but she liked how he spoke, so replied, "Yes, I'm having a great night, thanks for asking. I'm just waiting for the bus to go home now." The man said, "Oh, I'm very glad to hear you're having a good night. So the public phone box is near a bus stop then, I gather." Susie was enjoying the chat with the man, but realised the bus was coming, so quickly said, "I'm very sorry, I have to go. The bus is coming. It was nice talking to you. Bye." The man said, "It was very splendid talking to you also. Bye now." Susie walked into the bus and felt happy for some strange reason. About the phone call, the man had left a good impression on her. She was wondering, was it his voice or what he said, and she wondered what he had looked like. When she got home, she told her sister Rachel all about it. "I was waiting for the 10 o'clock bus, and well, I was very surprised to hear the public phone ring in the phone box right next to the bus stop. I answered it, and there was this really sweet man on the other end. And, well, we had a lovely chat, but unfortunately the bus came before I could even tell him my name." Her sister smiled and said, "Wow, what age was he? I wonder what he looked like. Maybe he looked like a film star." Susie said, "I'm not sure what age he was, and of course I have no idea what he looked like, but he seemed so sweet." Rachel said, "Are you going to wait at the bus stop again tomorrow night to see if he calls?" How do you expect him to call the same phone box again at the same time? It obviously was a wrong number he dialed. But the next night Susie made sure to be waiting for the 10 o'clock bus again, and was pleasantly surprised when the phone rang again. She ran into it and answered, "Hello?" "Hello, Susie. I am very happy that you were waiting for the bus again, and you answered the phone. I was hoping you would. I hope you're happy that I rang this phone again. Are you, Susie?" Susie said, "Well, yes, I kind of enjoyed speaking to you last night." The man said, "Well, that is splendid. Our feelings are mutual then. Tell me, Susie, is there anyone else waiting for the bus? Are you alone?" Susie said, "Yes, I'm alone. This is a very quiet road, you see. Not many people ever wait for this bus." The man said, "Oh, it must be in the middle of the country then, Susie, since not many people catch the bus." Susie saw the bus coming up the road and said to the man, "I'm sorry, the bus is here." The man said, "How about we continue a conversation tomorrow night? Same time, Susie?" Susie agreed. The next night at the same time, the phone rang again. The man said, "Susie, I'm not sure I even told you my name. My name is Fred, Susie, and do you know, I love your voice, but I would love to be able to put a face to that voice. How about we meet in person, Susie? Would you like that?" Susie thought about it, then quickly said, "Well, yes, if you would like that, sure." She gave him the directions to the phone booth and told him she would meet him at 9:30 tomorrow night. Back at Susie's house, her dad was reading a newspaper article about a serial killer at large in their locality and the surrounding areas of the countryside around their village. He was worried she was out late and was just about to call the police when she had walked in the door. Susie felt a strange feeling. It was like she was in love. She felt it strange knowing that she hadn't even met the man, but still felt strangely in love with him. She told her sister about her meeting him tomorrow night. The next day, when Susie asked to go out, her dad said, "No way, you're not going anywhere tonight." Susie was mad until her sister had an idea that maybe he would allow both girls go to the cinema together. Rachel was going to the cinema while Susie would meet the man. Rachel said to Susie, "Look, Susie, I was thinking about this. Maybe it's a bad idea. You were going to meet this man. I mean, he could be anyone. He could be a madman for all we know." Susie laughed it off and said she would meet him, and was sure he would be a really sweet guy. When Susie was on the bus, she heard a conversation between two people who were talking about a serial killer at large, a man who was targeting young women. Susie felt sick thinking of the stranger she was about to meet. She stayed on the bus and knew she couldn't go home, so she would go back to the cinema and join Rachel. But Rachel was worried about her sister and had already gone to meet her by the phone box. When Rachel was outside the phone box, she had been calling her sister's name, but all she could hear was her own echo. Suddenly a man walked out from the ditch and said, "Hello, Susie. It is so great to finally meet you." Rachel froze as the man went near her and she kicked him. The man said, "Oh, now, that's very nasty out of you, Susie. Very nasty indeed, and I have to punish you for that." He dragged her into his car and put her in the boot and shut it. Susie and Jane were twins and living in LA. Susie was very busy with her YouTube channel, where she spoke about different wellness tips and makeup tutorials. Jane was checking through her Instagram while Susie was speaking into the camera, doing a live stream. She said, "Hello guys, welcome to my live stream, and today I'm going to be giving ye great wellness tips on how to relax and get a better night's sleep. And having a great night's sleep not only adds to your physical well-being, but your mental well-being also. And I will also be sharing some delicious vegan recipes with ye that are also gluten-free." The live stream took about an hour, and afterwards Susie checked her emails and answered as many comments as she could. Susie was really looking forward to sign a new endorsement deal which would bring her in millions. She had a secret idea with her and her partners who were teaming with her. Everything was going great until Jane went missing. Susie explained to her partners that she would continue with her Secrets to Success idea in a few weeks, but right now she had to concentrate on getting her sister back. Susie spoke into the camera during a live stream. "Hi everyone, I have some very sad news for you today. My twin sister Jane has gone missing. If anyone knows anything about her whereabouts, please contact me or your local police station." The views were going up and up during the stream, and news of Jane's disappearance spread like wildfire. Soon it was front page news, and on almost every news station. Susie couldn't believe that the team she was partnering with were putting so much pressure on her. When she was all alone in her house, she walked down to her basement and turned the light on. She took the gag off her twin sister and put a gun to her head and said, "Okay, Susie, you either give me that secret idea you have that you got that $1 million deal, or I'm going to shoot you in your head and tell them I have another idea. I am sick and tired of all your stupid videos of you flaunting yourself and acting like you know it all. Now I'm in your place, which proves what I always thought but never told you. I'm just as good as you, and as a matter of fact, I'm much better than you." Suddenly there was a noise at the stairs. Jane turned around. A guy was standing holding a gun and said, "You bitch, I knew you were crazy from your videos, and now look at you, holding your own twin sister at gunpoint." The man, who was a stalker of Susie from months, shot Jane in her head.
thinking it was Susie, and untied Susie, thinking it was Jane. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jim was invited to a meeting with a huge TV station boss, and he was very nervous, but at the same time very excited. When he arrived at the office, he couldn't believe what he was about to hear. The boss spoke. "We can supply you with the answers to win and become the champion in the next episode of the Super Quiz Show. Now please don't tell your friend about what I said, because if you do, trust me, it won't work out good for you. I practically own the networks that have all the big shows on. So if you want to go with this plan, great, but if not, then just forget about it and don't tell anyone." Jim was speechless for a few seconds, but to him it felt like minutes. Then he finally spoke. "You mean you want to give me the answers and win the show and become the champion and beat my friend and break his unbeatable streak?" Brian said. "Yes, and don't forget, for each episode you will win $100,000. So, we will be giving you that for a good few months. In no time you'll be a millionaire." Jim was stuck in a rut, being out of a job and could really do with the money, and didn't want to pass up on the opportunity, so he took the deal. When he told his friend Daniel that he was going to be his opponent on the next show, he pretended he was picked out of the lottery they had every week for different opponents. When Daniel heard about it, he laughed, but didn't think much of it, because to him it would be just another great win. Jim was thinking about it at home while he was watching TV, and he wondered how it would make a difference to him being given the answers, as he could not see his friend Daniel not be able to answer any question, even if it went on for hours. He rang the number of the TV boss and asked him, and was told that they knew questions he didn't know the answers to. Jim didn't bother ask how they knew he wouldn't know, but he found it strange. On the night of the quiz show, they were asked loads of questions. It seemed like hundreds. Finally it came to the last question, and the host, Mr. Major, asked Jim, "Okay Jim, you're on your last question. If you get this right, then you are the winner of this series, which will knock the current Super Quiz champion off, and you will become the champion. The question is a riddle. What ship has 2 mates and no captain, and you broke it?" Jim found it strange, because he was never given the answer to this question. It was the first time he ever heard it. He could feel the sweat pouring from him and the heat of the lights shining down on him. Suddenly he felt he was going to faint when he looked over and saw his friend Daniel hold a gun to him and say, "I'll give you the answer. Friendship. You broke our friendship by taking that deal." Suddenly Jim heard the voice of the host. "Hello Jim, excuse me, are you okay? We are waiting for your final answer, which would entitle you to be the champion. Let me repeat the question. What is used to measure something, but also a king?" Jim answered, "A ruler." The crowd started clapping and applauding. Then everyone started screaming. He wondered why, and this time he knew he was awake. He saw Daniel hold a gun to him, screaming, "You're no friend of mine," and he shot him dead. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Marcus was the owner of a gated community. He prided himself on keeping his neighbours safe. They paid a big price to live in the community, but they felt it was worth it. One day Marcus was in his kitchen, drinking a cup of coffee, when he heard something at his door. He assumed it was his neighbour, but was shocked when he saw that it was a person in a mask carrying a gun. He ran into the hall and down towards his safe room, but he couldn't reach it before the man shot him in his leg. He couldn't believe how anyone could breach the gate of the community, don't mind say get into his house. He was worried it was some drug addict who could shoot him to just grab anything to sell for money for their next fix. Marcus pleaded with the person, "Please don't hurt me, just take anything you want and go, please." The person began to speak. "Hello there, Mr. Marcus. Aren't you very good helping people stay safe in this gated community? But then again, you get paid big for it, don't you? Now take me to the room that you even make more money from." Marcus was wondering did he mean what he thought he meant, so he took him around to room after room, but not to the room that he thought he meant. The man pointed the gun at Marcus's head and said, "You have 5 minutes to take me to that room, or I'm going to have my friends burn this community to the ground." Within 3 minutes, Marcus opened the door, where valuable paintings lined the wall. The man looked at one painting and found it very realistic, and as he moved closer, he saw a man blink. The man was behind bars. Marcus took a gun from behind a chair and pointed it at the man and said, "So you mint the paintings? I thought you found out about the human trafficking ring I run. Having them all here in this gated community works very well for me. Then I have them put out to wherever the highest price comes from. It's a pretty good business plan." The man froze when Marcus pulled a rope, which dropped a curtain exposing loads of people in cages that were ready to be trafficked. The man said, "Let me go. I won't tell anyone, please." Marcus found it strange when he heard the man giggle. He knew people giggled out of fear, but it didn't really suit this situation, and if he is afraid and begging to be let go, why would he be giggling? Then he saw one of the men in the cages drinking blood from a bottle. He then went from being weak looking to like a monster. He went around biting everyone in the cage, and they all turned into vampires from the brother of the man in the mask, who was now a vampire. He knew his brother needed vampire blood to escape. It was the only way. Otherwise he would have no impulse to survive or to bite anyone, and if he did, it would be pointless. He smiled as the people that were in cages were now out of their cage and coming straight for Marcus. They didn't attack each other, which he knew would happen. He smiled knowing that soon the gated community will become a community of vampires. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. It was Thanksgiving in Kevin's household, and his cousin Sam and dad Mark were visiting for Thanksgiving dinner. They were talking before the plates were ready to be put on the table and them start eating.
Sam was talking about his dad and his keen interest in spiders. Sam said, "My dad has loads of different spiders, and did you know that each year when we are asleep, there are lots of different spiders crawl into our mouths during our sleep?" Kevin said, "Don't say something so stupid and which isn't true. We are going to be eating dinner soon. We don't want to hear you lie about spiders crawling into our mouth. That is disgusting, and of course it isn't true." Sam got angry and said to his dad, "Dad, tell him it's true. Tell him that spiders do crawl into people's mouths when they're asleep." His dad said, "Son, that isn't exactly the topic of conversation we want to be having at Thanksgiving dinner." That night, Kevin went to bed early, while Sam was sleeping in the spare room. Kevin wasn't in the mood to play video games with Sam, as he found him annoying. He quickly fell asleep, but suddenly he awoke from his sleep in the middle of the night. He panicked when he realized he couldn't hardly breathe. He noticed there was something tied around his face, and he struggled to get it off, but luckily it did fast. But when it did, he froze in horror when spiders crawled out of his mouth. Sam was looking in from the door because he couldn't miss the prank he pulled on him, but suddenly he felt kind of sick. Within minutes he dropped to the ground after being bitten by a poisonous spider while putting them in Kevin's mouth. Kevin suddenly felt sick also, and they both died from spider poisoning from spiders Sam had stolen from his dad's bedroom, not knowing that one of them was a poisonous spider. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jake saw an ad online for a life coach with a guaranteed plan to make their life better in every single way. Jake thought it was just a load of marketing and advertising rubbish trying to sell an idea that clearly wouldn't work in any way. But he was hating his life so much, he thought to himself, what harm would it do? He made an appointment by sending an email, and he arrived in the office the next day. The man introduced himself. "Hello, Jake. Nice to meet you. My name is Robert Sampson. I am very pleased and thankful that you chose to do my course. This is a plan that has been guaranteed to work. Just you wait and see. Your life is going to take a huge turn for the better, and you will be happier than you ever were. You will be happier than you ever imagined. All you need to do is relax and go with the flow of the plan, and you will find that your life is absolutely amazing, and you will finally be able to feel the power of now. You will be able to focus on what you love and who you love, and be able to get rid of all the negative energy that is holding you back." The session lasted for about an hour. Within days, Jake's life had started to get so much better, just like Robert had promised him. He was so happy. He met a new girlfriend called Brooke, and they had a great day out in the carnival. The next day he went swimming, which he loved, but recently hadn't the mind to go. A week later he even joined a band and became the lead singer, which he always dreamt of doing, but didn't have the courage. If that wasn't enough, himself and his new girlfriend Brooke travelled to countries they had only dreamt of going to, but now could afford because of the money that was rolling in from the band's success. Robert was very happy.
with the progress he was finally achieving. He hated the teething problems with his other subjects, and that was a shame. Those very nice people looking for help only to wind up dead. He felt stupid that he didn't take into account they would die of hunger and thirst. But this was going to be different. He sorted that problem. These pods wouldn't let Jake die like the others who were plugged into the Digiverse created to them feel, hear, and see a world that was beautiful and amazing. But these pods should be able to solve that problem. Jake doesn't know either about the Digiverse. He doesn't know he's in a pod. If he would, wouldn't he freak out? Of course. Robert looked into the pod at Jake, wondering how his life in the Digiverse was going. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Terry was annoyed and angry at his friend James. He had told him about an idea of a movie similar to the shark movie Jaws, and he completely stole his idea and started shooting a movie exactly, word for word almost, to his idea. Which made it worse, James didn't even ask him to be involved. Terry knew he had to get his own back on him, but didn't know what he would do. But he knew he would think of something. Eventually he did. It was the second day of the shooting, and they were finally on their first shark attack scene. That is what gave him the idea. He was hidden behind a tree watching them through binoculars. They had a fake shark which looked totally real. There were a couple on the beach talking, then they went for a swim and they were both attacked by the shark. He had to admit, the whole thing looked very real. The next day of shooting, he was behind the same tree watching. He had his binoculars again. The shark was in the water just like yesterday. They swam up to the shark, and within seconds there was blood all over the water. The film crew and extras clapped. They were so happy with how real it looked. Suddenly it dawned on them, the reason the scene looked real was because the shark was real. Terry smiled proud of himself for finding a way to locate a real shark and have it exactly where their fake shark should be and ready to attack. He guessed the movie might not go ahead after such a dreadful accident. Then he smiled. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Sheriff Dave Watson was tired of the same group of teenagers wreaking havoc on Halloween night. He was proud of keeping the law and order in his town, and he wasn't going to let those pesky kids ruin his good reputation. Last Halloween he moved them on, but they just moved to another place, and he had to move them 3 times before they finally called it a night. And at that it was then about 3 or 4 in the morning. He was parked in a spot just over from the farmhouse where they were having their Halloween party. He had a good vantage point, so he got out of his car and looked through binoculars to see what they were doing. They were drinking and smoking weed, getting high as usual. He had something very special planned for them this Halloween, and that something would knock them out for the whole night, so he could get some peace and quiet for Halloween. He waited until the whole crew were in the farmhouse before he locked the door and pumped the whole house with sleeping gas. He had tried it out on various scumbags around his town, and it worked a charm. About an hour later, he was pumping the house with the gas, and they didn't even notice as the gas was invisible. Within minutes, they went from dancing to falling sound asleep. When the sheriff drove off smiling, the door of the farmhouse opened. Suddenly, a great fog came across the shed and mixed with the gas, carrying it through the town. Within minutes, trick-or-treaters who were enjoying Halloween suddenly started to fall asleep right in the street or footpath. Dave passed one couple who were lying down on the ground, saying to himself they drank too much, not knowing it was the gas being carried by the fog. Suddenly Dave noticed it getting very foggy, so foggy he could barely see. Then suddenly he felt drowsy and fell asleep at the wheel as the police car veered off a cliff, falling hundreds of feet below and blowing up, with Dave burning inside. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jack was a criminal into all sorts of criminal activity. He was in court for so many different crimes. He spent 10 years in prison, but since he was released, he didn't get reformed. He just got better at not being caught for whatever crimes he committed. During his last court appearance, the judge had told him that if he keeps getting arrested, he will be put into prison for good. One night, Jack was trying to rob a bank, but then it went horribly wrong, and he ended up shooting a police officer. He knew it was the death penalty for capital punishment. While he was waiting on death row, there were several groups against the death penalty and wanting to ban it outright. He sat in prison writing and writing about his feelings, trying to pass the time. He had no access to the internet or newspapers, but still found out about the groups that were pushing for the death penalty to be banned. It was a prison warden on death row told him the first day it was finalized, he would not be getting the death penalty. He would not be sentenced to death. He was relieved, but then felt even sicker, knowing he would be locked up in a prison for years and years until he finally died. He wondered how he would stay sane. To his surprise, one day, a man in a suit opened his cell and said to him, "Hello, Jack. My name is Terry. I am the head of New Beginnings. I am the leader of the group that has successfully banned the death penalty. You are the first person we are trying the alternate punishment out on. You just need to go through a quick operation and then you are free to go out into the outside world." Jack couldn't believe his ears and knew there must have been a catch. The next day he was lying in a room with doctors all around him, and when he woke up, the doctor said,
"Hi Jack, your procedure is done, and you are free to go." Jack asked what was the catch, and they told him, "You will see, but don't worry Jack, you won't be hurt, and you won't ever get locked up again." When Jack left the room, none of the officers acknowledged him or said goodbye or good luck. When he was walking down the street, no one acknowledged him. It wasn't until he tried to make a phone call from when he was home he found something strange. No matter what number he rang or text he tried writing, nothing happened. He knocked at his friend's door. There was no answer. Suddenly his friend's car pulled up in his driveway, and Jack said, "They set me free," but his friend didn't seem to hear him. He didn't see him. And then he knew the new punishment for him not getting the death penalty was being immortal, invisible, and alone, with no chance of lifting an object to let anyone know he was there. He knew he was immortal because there was a voice inside his head told him. But that voice told him that now that he knows he will be alone, it also told him no matter what he lifts, he will think he lifted it. He will think he opened doors. He will think he threw glasses if that's what he done. But to anyone else, there will be no one or nothing there. Jack would be invisible, alone, and immortal. We stopped checking for monsters under our bed once we realized they were inside us. "Don't turn the lights off, please, Mommy," he said timidly, fear resonating in his voice. His mother laughed lovingly and assured him the nightlight would provide sufficient lighting from whatever he feared would come forth from the darkness once she had left. "Okay, but please check in my closet before you go," he asked of his mother meekly. She decided to humour him and did as he asked. Once satisfied nothing was in there, he seemed a little more at ease, his young head against the soft pillow. She passed by his bed and kissed his forehead lovingly. "Good night, my sweet boy," she whispered as she stood upright. "I love you, Mommy," he chimed in as she left. Just before she shut the door, "I love you too, Aaron," she said with a smile on her face as the door sealed him in from the rest of the house. Once she had left, the room immediately became tenfold scarier. The pale nightlight, rather than being reassuring, cast an eerie glow across the room, prompting shadows to dance in the darkness to some unheard tune. Aaron lay in bed, gripping the covers tightly at his chin. His mother had left the closet door ajar. If he but even closed his eyes with it unclosed, he would be vulnerable to whatever he was sure resided in there. Once the lights were off, he had to close it if he hoped to get any sleep. He looked around the room for some sort of defense against the creatures that might attack him once he tried to disrupt their plan of escaping. His eyes happened upon the baseball bat propped up against the wall near the door. He scrambled out of bed, disrupting the dance of the shadows as his colossal shadow flickered across the room as he passed through the pale glow of the light on his way to his weapon. Holding the bat in trembling hands, he scanned the room for any possible assailants. Aaron had broke out into a cold sweat. He could feel the shirt of his pajamas sticking tightly to his torso as his brow accumulated sweat. He wondered if the monsters could smell fear. If they could, he was in for it.
He probably reeked of fear, and sweat of course. He held the bat tight and took a step forward. He was going to shut the closet door. Each step felt as though he was wearing lead boots. It was almost painful walking towards what very might be your dead man walking, as they would say. The shadows had begun to dance again. Perhaps it was a dance of death. Aaron began to wonder what the monster would do to him if the bat could not protect him. He could almost see it slowly stretching out to its full size, towering above him, picking him up and bringing him closer to it. Its horribly scarred face, full of blisters and warts, pouring out a gooey slime. The dead look in its eyes and row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. Would it bite his head clean off, or simply devour him whole? Aaron came back to reality, as he was now at the closet door. He turned back to check the room, once more to see if perhaps one of them had found a way around him. There was nothing. Thankfully he could see his room almost perfectly. His creased sheet lay half on the floor, half on the bed. Probably from when he had scrambled out of it. The various toys scattered around the room seemed to have gathered to bear witness to the grand event that was about to unfold. The curtains rustled lightly. He had probably just forgotten to close the window properly. Aaron took a deep breath and decided he would face the monster rather than simply shutting the closet door. He exhaled quickly and swung the closet door wide open, bat high above his head and ready to face his doom. He breathed yet another deep breath, but the exhalation was more of a sigh of relief than anything. There was no monster. He felt emboldened by the fact he would have taken any monster head on. He was a warrior, at least in his eyes he was. He could take on anything. At the back of his mind he was almost disappointed now. His adrenaline was rushing. He could feel the blood in his cheeks and hear it in his ears. He was ready to fight a monster. He made his way back to his bed, but with his newfound bravery decided to close the window first. Usually Aaron would be too scared to open the curtain in the dark out of fear of what would be behind the curtain, or worse yet, what might be looking in on him from the outside. But he was brave now. He was a would-be monster killer. He could close a window and bear looking out the dark window. He approached the curtain and flung the curtain back, bat prepped to swing at any monsters hiding behind it. Nothing. Dang, monsters are scared now, he thought, with a smile on his face. They know I'm not scared, and I've got a bat, he told himself. Reaching for the window, he saw it was closed. Realizing his eyes must have played a trick on him in the dark, with nothing but the pale light to provide for his sight, he returned to his bed and threw the bat at the foot of his bed before jumping on it. The adrenaline had washed over him, and he now felt ready for bed, confident in the fact that there were no monsters, as well as the fact he had conquered his fear by means of facing that which could have possibly been lurking in the closet. He reached over the edge of his bed to pull up the cover that had been a casualty of his fear, excitement, and had fallen to the ground. Groping for the covers, his heart skipped a beat as he felt not only the cover, but something much softer beneath the covers. He had probably dropped the covers on one of his many stuffed animals. He slung himself over the bed to retrieve not only the cover, but the stuffed animal too, as some company in bed would be very welcome after his ordeal and excitement. The smell washed over him, first as his head neared the edge of the bed. The smell has no description, but if one had to put a name to it, it smelled of death. It penetrated his nostrils as it grew worse. He raised the covers, beneath which was not a stuffed animal, the decomposed face. It tried to smile, but the skin around its face was non-existent, and so the smile was just it bearing a few rotten teeth still in its head. "Why don't you come play down here with me, where it's nice and dark?" it said, as it reached a bony and fleshless hand up and pulled Aaron by their throat into the darkness. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. I asked my love to take a walk, just a little walk, down beside where the waters flow, down by the banks of the Ohio. He sang it so softly, the melody barely seemed to leave his lips. His voice was beautiful, hauntingly so. He held her hand as they lay next to the stream, and he sang for her, and only say that you'll be mine, in no other's arms intertwine. So soft his voice was, almost as though he was whispering. Well, he needn't worry that anyone else would hear him sing. The song was, after all, for her, so he didn't need to belt out the tune. He turned and looked at her. He was overcome with a rush of warmth people call love. With his free hand he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. She had a faint smile on her face. It was almost a neutral look, and he continued to sing, down beside where the waters flow, down by the banks of the Ohio. He got up, leaving her to lie, and listened to the melodic rush of the stream, the bright hot sun gleaming down on God's good earth, the green grass beneath their picnic blanket rustling gently in the breeze. It was scenic, a simple, delicate daisy, just one. He had no need for a bunch. He walked with it gently. He had always been a gentle person. It reflected in his singing, with the way it was so quiet. If you asked anyone about him, they'd tell you he'd never hurt a fly. They say love is like a flower, you must nurture it and let it grow. She was his flower, his love, his delicate little daisy. They also say you should not pick the flower and put it in a vase for display, as it will soon wither and die. Rather let the flower be, and let it be beautiful in the wilderness. That is what he intended for her. He would never pluck her and let the world see her beauty. She was his flower, and he wanted to grow and nurture her. He arrived back at the stream. A bird far off in the distance let out a shriek. Something must have frightened it. He hadn't wandered far from the stream, and once back next to her, he lay down, daisy in hand, head on the grass, breathing in her scent deeply as he lay next to her. Just as the flower in his hand had a beautiful smell, so did she. He placed the flower in her hair, further beautifying her, a flower for his flower. He looked towards the bright sun and squinted. Such a lovely day. The stream continued to flow steadily. He gazed at her with nothing but love. Unfortunately, the love he had for her was unrequited. Well, it didn't matter. He loved her enough for the both of them. He threw the knife into the river as he got up and walked away, leaving her there in all her beauty, flower in hair, young and beautiful, pale skin due to loss of blood flow, but still beautiful. He sang the last bit of the song as he walked away. I held a knife against her breast, as into my arms she pressed. She cried, "Good God, don't you murder me. I'm not prepared for eternity." I wandered home, tween 12 and 1. I cried, "My God, what have I done? I've killed the only girl I love, for she would not want to be my bride, and only say that you'll be mine, and in no other's arms intertwine. Down beside where the waters flow, down by the banks of the Ohio. If he couldn't have her in life, he'll have her in debt." It was a secluded piece of the river. He could come visit her any time he'd like. He'd never have to fear losing her to anyone. She was his forever. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jerry was 8 years old when he was in class one day, as usual drawing his favourite types of cartoons. They always were horror cartoons. They were drawings of witches and monsters, even when it wasn't Halloween. He fit right in when it was Halloween, because the other kids were interested in the spooky stuff then. But he didn't forget the times they laughed at him. He promised himself he would have the last laugh. It was Halloween night 15 years later, and there was a school reunion. Jerry couldn't believe his luck, the school reunion falling on a Halloween night. Jerry was on his own most of the night during the party, apart from some classmates walking up to him and saying hi, probably feeling guilty for how they treated him in school. Everyone was enjoying themselves and were dressed in different Halloween costumes. He had to admit to himself he was rather pleased to be at a Halloween party, because he was never asked to any party as a kid. When the party was over and they were outside of the school, was when Jerry shot them, saying to himself, "You were laughing at my crayon drawings, now I'll be laughing at your chalk outlines." The next morning, Jerry smiled, looking at the crime scene tape and chalk outlines of where he shot them dead. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content.